Dance for joy or lust or anger.
So welcome to Sensible Secondhand Classics, the show where we look at practical and sensible cars that you can buy that are over 15 years old for a budget of between £1,000 and £5,000. This is a 1980 Vauxhall Chevette L, but is it any good? Should you care? Let's find out, shall we? So here we are at the Great British Car Journey in Derbyshire once again. Surprised after the last time they let me come back, but you know, that's very kind of them. And we're looking at actually a car that was the predecessor to the Mark 1 Astra that I drove here in 2021. Straight away, in comparison with the Astra, this is a very, very different car. There's no engineering at all in common, absolutely none. The gearbox is also a 4-speed manual, but of course it's a completely different 4-speed manual. The car is just a lot more difficult to drive. You have to think about things a lot more. We haven't got the nice smooth family one engine, we've got the old engine for the Vauxhall Viva, 1256cc in capacity, generating about 58 horsepower, which the vast majority of Chevettes actually used. We'll go over some of the other T-car variants a little bit later on, but the Chevette was actually made mainly in this country. Never remember if it was actually made at Luton or Ellesmere Port. I forget about that, but you know, there we go. Gearbox is sort of approximate, really. The gears aren't quite not quite where you thought they were. Very different from the 5-speed Getrag gearbox in the Chevette HSR that I drove last year, which is a very, very different car from it. It's even got different axles in it, things like that. The HS, the HSX and HSR will have this slant 4 engine with a 16 valve head on it, which generates about 130 horsepower as you would have ordered an HS, and then up to whatever you want. A lot of the HSRs 150, some have a 2.6 engine, you know, you name it. This standard one just feels nothing like the HSR to drive at all. The engine doesn't obviously sound the same at all. But one thing that is kind of similar is the steering, which is incredibly light. These were used a lot as driving school cars back in the day, and probably not actually that bad a choice. So it looks very different from the HSR that I tried in 2022. This 4-door Saloon. This is an early 1980 car, which just was built after the facelift that occurred in September 1979. So we've got fog lights added to this one here. It's actually, like so many cars in this collection, it's in superb condition. I suspect this was actually the centrepiece of a dealer's showroom at some point, otherwise it wouldn't have that sort of sticker from a garage in South Wales. So nice bright hubcaps on this, lovely colour. Chevettes are actually really, really rare, any type. The HSRs are particularly rare because they made so few of them, but in comparison with numbers of these sold, and they sold them for 9 years in this country. First of all, overlapped the last years of a Viva HC, and then itself was sort of replaced by the Mark 1 Astra in 1980, but not really, because it kept going. And then after 1983, it was on sale at the same time as the Nova for about a year. I don't quite know what General Motors were doing in that sort of way, because, you know, the Chevette was really the replacement effectively for the Viva HC, and certainly the previous Cadet, which was equivalent to the Viva, had been replaced by the Cadet C that is the same as this and a ton of other cars on the T-car platform that General Motors had in the 70s. And the Cadet D or Mark 1 Astra was a replacement for the Cadet C and the Chevette, but you know, they just kept making it because they thought people wanted it. No head rests or restraints or anything in here. This is the L model, which gives some luxury but not an awful lot. We don't even get a glove box. I don't think you can get a glove box in any Chevette at all. Very big transmission tunnel. Not the easiest car to get in and out of. You've got to duck your head in a little bit. Quite comfortable. Very, very different in terms of ergonomics from that Mark 1 Astra that they've actually got in the museum that I drove in 2021. Very different. Very typical kind of mid-70s dashboard. Not really an awful lot on here. We do get a Blaupunkt stereo, this being the L model. But you can even see that the heater sort of pipes run through the area, all exposed. 4-speed gearbox. I can't remember if you can get an automatic on the Chevette. You might have been able to. You know, air vents in the middle and the sides, some switches, hazard light switches kind of tucked down there. So yeah, fog lights, and I think some of these are the front lamps as well. Horn is on there, but we won't do that. Not really a lot to say. Rated window is just down there. Yeah. It's just absolute kind of economy motoring, I think is the phrase I would use for one of these. Just normal family car. Similar, I suppose, something like a Mark 2 Escort. We did have a Viva as well to soak up those customers. So yeah, not really a lot to say in terms of the front. The heater vents for the feet of the driver and passenger are actually these little pipes that come out there. Wow. And very, very sort of basic vinyl trim with no kind of hook there for the sunlight. I think that mirror's been stuck on by somebody. It's quite careful with a car like this because some of the fittings are so old. I mean, this car is older than me, so it's classic. And the doors don't really open very wide either. You've got to be very careful with your feet. It's no wonder that's cracked. It's through many, many years of people doing the same thing. So if we go round to this side, we'll get the key to go in the boot later because we need the key for that. This was the only Chevette model that actually had a set of doors at the back. Every other thing, including the 3-door estate, just had doors at the front. So actually, once you're in here, you fight with the seatbelt. It's not too bad. Your knees are quite upright. I remember being a rear seat passenger in one of these in the early 1990s when the parents of our regular childminder had a Chevette. It was a 3-door in blue with a rubber rear spoiler. I think it was on an X or a Y plate. Maybe they got a special edition or something. Ashtrays in the standard sort of style, very, very thin plastic. You have to be very careful with those. Windy windows, of course. Electric windows in a Chevette were a sort of pipe dream. But yeah, you know, you could use this as a family car, I suppose, if your children weren't too big. And a lot of people did. You have a choke lever by the steering column there. Heated ventilation controls just next to the radio on the left. Just everything's very, very simple, which a lot of you will like in comparison with modern cars. Still, this enormous kind of transmission tunnel in here because, of course, the car's rear-wheel drive. Right, let's get the key and have a look in the boot, shall we? Just turned over the paperwork in here to make sure we don't see any names of previous owners or anything like that, but quite a lip on here, like a massive lip for loading things in. That must have been quite awkward, particularly on the 3-door hatch models. State would have been a bit better, I imagine, but quite a lot of space actually. No folding rear seats or anything like that. Jack and the spare wheel live on this side here, which I suppose could be a good or a bad thing. But the condition of this car is just extraordinary. Everything is perfect, you know, no rust really or anything like that. So let's not lock the keys to the boot, viewers. That would be a terrible idea. So we won't do that. So yeah, the sort of shape of the car that would have been so common, and the colour about 40 years ago, but now you don't see them anymore, do you? So here we are, the 1256cc overhead valve engine, but was in the majority of Chevettes, and also probably in the majority of the HC Vivas. I think the HC Viva got an upgrade from the 1159 to the 1256 engine about 1971. So yeah, longitudinally mounted, very easy to work on, generating around 58 horsepower in this application. Very different from the 2.3 slant 4 that was in the HSR. And yeah, not really an awful lot to say. You can see why a lot of people have tried to fit much larger engines to these. It says made in the United Kingdom by Vauxhall. I can't remember offhand actually whether the Chevette was made at Ellesmere Port or Luton at the moment. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, not really an awful lot to say. Everything's pretty obvious. Hopefully we've got a brake servo. Yes, we have, and that's not a remote one either, so that's good. That's an advantage over the Viva that we drove, which had all-round drum brakes and no servo. I like this facelifted front end better than I do the pre-facelift one, actually, viewers. I think that looks quite neat. Anyway, I think it's time to go for another drive. Once you actually get used to this gearbox, which you know, I'm pretty bad, viewers, at sort of driving a lot of the older cars anyway, but you know, this one has been a challenge, particularly because the seats in this car are totally fixed. You cannot move the seats at all. You can move the backrest a bit. Oh, there's fourth. Let's try second. There we go. Yeah, the gearbox is... gears are just not what you expect them to be at all. It's a bit like an old Land Rover Series 3, sort of wiggly gearbox type thing. Let's avoid this sort of heavy plant machinery that's sort of going around and go around this roundabout. Let's see if this handles better than an HC Viva that we drove in January. It does actually. It does feel like a more modern platform. The HC Vivas, you know, they felt very old-fashioned really, even at the time that they were made. This feels like a car from the 70s, and it absolutely is. Stop it to third again, there we go. We'll look at some of the trim levels later on. There were a few variations of body style. There were 4 and 2-door saloons. There was a 3-door hatch, which is the one I've driven before, and also a 3-door estate. Yes, a 3-door estate. For some reason, General Motors were really fond of 3-door estates all the way up to the 1980s. I don't know why, particularly, but that was seen as something that, you know, was desirable. So threading it through the cones, a bit of push-pull steering, but steering is not nearly as heavy as you'd think it is at all. Without, you know, there's no power settings or anything in a car like this. So yeah, not a favourite car I've ever sort of driven here in terms of driving it, but it feels very nostalgic, and I think that's all part of the fun of something like this. Lloyd Young Consulting stickers, t-shirts and mugs are available by clicking the link to the Google form in the video description below. Okay viewers, let's look at some Vauxhall Chevette trim levels. So we have the L, which is this one. This is a bit more luxurious actually than some of the L's were, because the base Chevette replaced the L, if that makes sense, at some point during the 70s. The E was the absolute stripped out economy model. There was an ES, a GLS, a GL, a Special, the Sun Hatch, the Black Pearl, the Silhouette, the Black Watch, the Grenadier and the Jubilee. If we're talking about the kind of sporty ones, obviously the HS, those were mainly silver. The HSX, those were mainly black. The HSR, those were mainly silver, and they had the crazy body kit on them. The T-Car platform that General Motors introduced in 1973 had a lot of variants, such as the Mapesi. That continued as the Mapesina until 1988. Then there was the Secondhand Bird, it was a variation on that. The Isuzu Impulse, the Isuzu iMark, the Opel Isuzu, the Chevrolet Chevette, that continued to 87, I think. The GMC Chevette, the Opel K180, the Holden Gemini, the Holden or Isuzu Piazza, yes, the Isuzu Piazza, that was based on the T-Car platform as well. The Chevrolet Marajo, the Pontiac T1000, the Chevrolet Chevy 500, the Opel Kadett C, the Isuzu Bellette Gemini, the Opel Gemini, the Pontiac Acadian, and of course the van version, which was the Bedford, then later Vauxhall Chevette. So viewers, should you consider a Vauxhall Chevette as a sensible classic for between £1,000 and £5,000? Well, it depends if you can actually find one. Even the museum had trouble finding one of these for their collection. So, you know, it's rather a moot point in a way. Yeah, I mean, I much prefer the Mark 1 Astra to this. It's a much, much better car than the Chevette. The Chevette was okay for the time, probably a little bit better than the VHC Viva. Yes, this is very nostalgic for me because I remember travelling one of these when I was a child. But I probably think going a little bit newer would be a little bit better, maybe like a Nova or something like that. Anyway, thank you ever so much indeed once again for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment below, and we will see you again soon for more reasonably priced nostalgic motoring.